One of the highest-ranking black officers in Central City, Maya walks into a local store to grab a quick snack. Moments later, a white officer she's never met before accuses her of shoplifting. His eyes are full of contempt. His words are dripping with racism. Maya, a decorated leader, is handcuffed and humiliated in front of shocked civilians. But why was she really targeted? And who sent him? The truth behind this arrangement will leave you speechless. If you're outraged by injustice, subscribe now. This story is just beginning. It all happened so fast. 1 minute, Captain Maya Collins was paying for a granola bar and a bottle of water. The next, cold metal handcuffs were clamped around her wrists. The sun still shone outside, but to Maya, everything had gone dark. She tried to reason with Officer Stevens, the white cop who had accused her of stealing. She told him her name, her badge number, her years of service. She told him he was making a mistake, but he didn't care. But his eyes weren't looking at a fellow officer. They were looking at someone he had already judged. Someone guilty in his mind the second she walked into the store. She was a black woman in uniform, and that was all it took. Maya stayed calm, even as the shame burned in her chest. She knew that if she raised her voice or fought back, he'd use it as an excuse. So she went quietly. But inside, her spirit screamed. How could this be happening? How could someone who wore the same badge twist it into a weapon against her? She had faced criminals, broken up fights, pulled people from burning cars, but nothing felt as terrifying as being dragged through her own precinct in chains. Heads turned, eyes widened. Whispers followed her like shadows. Is that Captain Collins? What happened? Did she really? Maya wanted to scream, "No!" She wanted to tear the cuffs off and show them who she really was. But instead she was shoved into a holding cell, the same kind she used to send criminals to. The walls closed in. The bench was cold. Her body shook not from fear, but from rage. She wasn't just being accused. She was being erased. When Lieutenant Harris, one of the few people she still trusted, came to see her, Maya thought it was finally over. But even Harris asked her the same question. Did you do it? The sting was worse than the cuffs. No, Maya said, her voice trembling but firm. He set me up? Harris believed her. She said they'd get to the bottom of it. But Maya wasn't about to sit back and wait. That night she called her old partner, Deshawn. He was the kind of guy who didn't ask questions. He just got to work. By morning, they were combing through records, watching edited security footage, digging into Officer Stevens' history. The footage from the store had been cut. The moment Maya reached for the snack, gone. The moment she paid, gone. Only one thing remained, a clip of her standing near the counter, looking like she might walk out. A lie, perfectly framed. Maya didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the smug look on Stephen's face, heard the cold click of the cuffs, felt the stares burning into her skin. She had to fight back, but she had to be smart. She wasn't just trying to clear her name. She was trying to survive. The breakthrough came when they found the store clerk. He was nervous, pale, sweating. I didn't mean to get you in trouble, he mumbled. He said it wouldn't go this far. Stevens had gotten to him, forced him to file a fake report. Maya's stomach dropped. It was all planned, a setup, a trap. But now she had a witness. Still, that wasn't enough. The department was already whispering behind her back. If she wanted justice, she needed proof. Real proof. That's when Deshawn said it. We have to go to Stephen's house. That's where the original footage is. Maya hesitated. Breaking into another cop's house? That was dangerous. Illegal. Reckless. But then she remembered the cell, the silence, the shame. She nodded. "Let's go." They went in through the back. Quiet. Careful. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it would give them away. Room by room they searched. Then, there it was. A flash drive in a locked drawer. Deshawn grabbed it just as the front door slammed. Stevens was home. They ran, through the hall, out the door. Gunfire followed. Bullets shattered the air. Maya drove like her life depended on it, because it did. They made it to a safe house, an old cabin her aunt once owned. There, they opened the flash drive. Maya held her breath. The footage was there. Raw, unedited. It showed everything. Her walking in, picking up the snack, paying, smiling at the clerk. Nothing suspicious. No theft. Just a woman buying a snack. A cop being human. But before they could send it out, Maya's phone buzzed. "We know where you are." Stevens was coming. She and Deshawn prepared for a final stand. Guns drawn. Doors locked. When Stevens burst through, wild-eyed and angry, he wasn't just trying to stop them, he was trying to bury the truth forever. But this time, Maya didn't flinch. She stood tall. She shouted, "Drop your weapon!" And when he raised it, Deshawn fired. Stevens went down, screaming threats with every breath. Sirens filled the night. More officers arrived. Guns raised. Tension thick. Maya stepped forward, hands trembling but steady. "I have proof," she said. "He framed me." The flash drive was passed from hand to hand, eyes wide as the footage played. Whispers turned into gasps. Doubts turned into truth. "Captain Collins," one officer said, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry." Maya didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, breathing. Alive. Free. Not yet healed, but no longer silent. This story isn't fiction. It's a reflection of what too many face every day. If you felt her pain, if you want justice to be louder than lies, subscribe now. The world needs to hear more stories like this. Don't let her voice be the only one. Captain Maya Collins couldn't sleep. Not that night, not the next, not for days after. Even with the truth slowly coming to light, even after the flash drive exposed the edited footage, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The pain didn't stop after the cuffs came off. That was just the beginning. Her name was out there now. Accused, suspect, thief. The department had been silent. Not one public statement had been made to clear her name. The news picked it up. Headlines whispered scandal. Social media didn't wait for the facts. Her photo was everywhere, cropped from surveillance footage, frozen in a moment that told the wrong story. Black police captain caught in alleged theft. Top officer under investigation. Nobody mentioned the truth. Nobody said framed. Nobody said racism. And if they did, it was buried under comment sections filled with hate. Maya sat alone in her apartment, her uniform folded neatly on the chair across the room. Untouched. She hadn't worn it since the arrest. She couldn't. Every time she looked at it, she remembered the laughter in Officer Stevens' voice, the tight grip of the cuffs, the cold eyes of her own colleagues as she was marched through her precinct like a criminal. She tried to eat. She couldn't. She tried to call her sister. The words caught in her throat. Shame wrapped around her like chains. How do you explain to your family that you've spent your entire life defending the law, only to be betrayed by the very badge you swore to protect? And the pain didn't stop at embarrassment. No, Maya started receiving threats, anonymous voicemails, distorted voices saying things like, "You're done," or "You should have stayed quiet." Her car was keyed in the parking lot of her apartment. A dead rat was left at her doorstep one morning with a note. Black traitor. Maya wanted to scream, but all she could do was stare. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of helplessness. How did it come to this? She had enemies now, inside and outside the department. Every time she stepped into the grocery store or walked down the street, she felt it. The stares, the whispers. Her neighbors, people she had once protected, now crossed the street when they saw her. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt most was the silence from those she had once called friends. People she'd gone into dangerous situations with, people whose lives she'd saved. None of them spoke up. No one checked in. No one stood by her. It was like she didn't exist. Or worse, like she was never one of them at all. But Maya refused to let the pain swallow her. With the help of Deshawn, she kept fighting. They'd uploaded the unedited footage. They had the confession from the store clerk. But Stevens was still out there, still walking free, still spinning his version of the story. He claimed the footage was manipulated. He said Maya and Deshawn broke into his home illegally. He filed a complaint, saying they'd assaulted him. It was absurd, but it didn't matter. The system had already shown it wasn't on Maya's side. She had to keep proving herself, over and over, just to breathe. One day, as Maya sat at a coffee shop, hood pulled low, sunglasses hiding tired eyes, she saw a news segment flash across the TV, behind the counter. Internal Affairs investigates Officer Rick Stevens for evidence tampering and misconduct. Her heart skipped. It was happening. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, but then came the follow-up. Sources say Captain Collins may still face disciplinary action for her role in the incident. She nearly dropped her coffee. Disciplinary action? For being set up? For fighting back? Maya went home and threw her keys across the room. They hit the wall with a sharp clang, landing beside her untouched uniform. Her eyes burned with tears. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't give them that. She just sat on the floor, back against the door, breathing like she had run a marathon. Her whole life had been about playing by the rules, rising through the ranks, earning respect. And still, it wasn't enough. Her skin spoke louder than her resume. Her silence was never protection. Her excellence was never armor. The next few days blurred together. She met with lawyers, gave interviews to Internal Affairs, submitted written statements, collected sworn testimony from the store clerk, pulled together timelines, files, text messages, anything that could help. She was exhausted. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night. Her voice cracked from talking too much. Her hands were blistered from writing and rewriting her defense. And still, the department stalled. They said they were reviewing all materials. They said, "We're doing our best." But Maya knew what that meant. Delay. Hope you quit. Hope you disappear. But Maya refused. Then came the subpoena, Stevens suing her for unlawful entry and assault. It was another tactic. Another attempt to make her seem like the aggressor, like the villain. Deshawn was furious. "He's scared. He's scrambling." But Maya didn't feel strong. She felt tired. Like she was swimming through concrete. Like no matter how loud she screamed, nobody really wanted to hear her. She went to her mother's house that weekend. She hadn't told her everything, but her mom had seen the news. "Maya," she whispered, sitting beside her on the porch. "You did nothing wrong. They see your strength, and it scares them." Maya nodded, eyes on the horizon. "It's not just that," she said softly. They don't see me. Not really. They see a threat in a uniform." Her mom wrapped an arm around her. For the first time in weeks, Maya let herself cry. Deep, guttural sobs that shook her to her core. Not just for what she lost, but for everything she thought she had built that turned out to be paper thin. All the promotions, all the plaques on the wall, all the speeches about diversity and progress, none of it stopped a racist officer from framing her. None of it saved her from silence. But then something unexpected happened. People started reaching out. Former trainees, young officers who had once looked up to her. Black girls from the community who said they wanted to join the force because of her. Emails, messages, videos. "We believe you. You inspire us. Keep fighting." Maya watched one clip on repeat, a teenage girl in a hoodie saying, "You stood up when you didn't have to. Now I know I can too." It gave her strength. Not enough to erase the pain, but enough to keep moving. Then came the final hearing. Maya sat across from department brass. Stevens seated across from her in a sling and bandages. Dramatic. Calculated. He spun his lies like he always did. Claimed fear. Claimed confusion. Said Maya was aggressive. That she was acting erratically. That she fit the profile. The room was quiet. Until Maya spoke. Her voice, calm but full of truth, cut through the air. "I didn't just fight to clear my name. I fought because if this could happen to me, a captain, it could happen to anyone who looks like me. And it does. Every day. You just don't see it. Or maybe you choose not to." The panel exchanged looks. Papers shuffled. And then, finally, words Maya thought she'd never hear. "Officer Stevens, effective immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending criminal investigation for tampering with evidence and false reporting. Captain Collins, you are cleared of all charges." Maya sat frozen. The world moved around her, but she stayed still. Her hands were clenched, her breathing shallow. She wasn't sure if it was real, but as she walked out of the courtroom, Deshawn waiting with open arms, cameras flashing in the distance, she finally felt it. Relief. Not joy, not celebration. Just the release of pain she had carried for too long. Maya knew the damage wasn't over. Some people would always doubt her. Some stains never come out. But she also knew something else, something stronger. She had survived. She had fought back. And she had won. And now, she had a bigger mission. She wasn't going to just put her uniform back on and pretend nothing happened. No. Maya Collins was going to use her voice, to speak for those who couldn't, to fight for reforms inside the department, to protect others from suffering what she did. This wasn't just about one officer anymore. This was about a system, a sickness, and she was ready to help cure it. If you stood with Maya, if her story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe. We share real stories of real people battling injustice. Your voice matters. Let's fight back. Together. Of course. Here's the 1,700-word continuation of Idea 4, following the emotional aftermath of Idea 3. This version adds deeper emotional elements and dramatic actions Maya Collins experiences, building tension while calling on the audience to support her with likes and encouragement. Even after being cleared, Maya Collins didn't feel free. She'd walked out of that courtroom with a clean record, but not a clean heart. Her badge was returned. Her name was restored. But something inside her had cracked, and no amount of justice on paper could patch it. Officer Rick Stevens had been suspended and now faced a criminal investigation. But his shadow still loomed. She could still see his smug smile when she closed her eyes, still hear the clink of the cuffs around her wrists, still feel the heat of humiliation burning down her spine. The news cycle had moved on. The city was back to normal. But Maya's world hadn't stopped spinning. If anything, it had only just begun to tilt. The department told her she could return to work whenever she was ready. But how do you go back to the same halls where they watched you be walked through in handcuffs? How do you look into the eyes of your team, some who believed in you, some who didn't, and pretend the betrayal never happened? Every step she took inside that precinct now echoed louder. Every nod felt forced. Every salute tasted hollow. The uniform didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like a lie she was forced to wear to keep breathing. Her first day back, she made it halfway down the hallway before she turned around and walked right back out. Her hands were shaking, her throat tight. She locked herself in her car and screamed until her voice went raw. Not out of fear, but grief. Grief for everything she used to believe. Grief for the illusion she spent her whole career protecting. She had always told herself that justice would prevail, that the system worked if you just followed the rules. But now she knew better. Now she knew the rules bent to whoever had power. And when power was threatened by truth, truth got buried. But Maya didn't want to be buried. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She fought back. Not with fists, not with guns, but with truth. She called a meeting, not just with officers, but with reporters, community leaders, and anyone who would listen. She stood at the front of the room in plain clothes, no badge, no script, just scars, real ones, and she spoke. She told them what happened. The setup, the lies, the silence, the loneliness. She described in painful detail what it feels like to serve a system that turns its back on you the moment your skin color threatens its illusion of equality. At first, the room was quiet. No one knew what to say. But then the questions came. The tears, the apologies. And then something unexpected. The claps. One by one, people stood. Some officers lowered their heads, ashamed. Others nodded, inspired. A young black woman in the crowd said, "You made me believe I could wear the badge. Even after all this, you still do." That night, Maya went home and cried. But this time, it wasn't from pain. It was from purpose. She started speaking publicly. Schools, churches, civilian boards. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told people the truth. That justice isn't a guarantee. That racism wears many uniforms. And that silence from good people is just as deadly as action from bad ones. She used her story to shine a light on the cracks beneath the surface. But every time she spoke, the threats followed. Voicemails. Messages. One night, someone even spray-painted "liar" across her garage door. She stood outside staring at it for an hour. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. But then she picked up a bucket of paint and covered it, letter by letter. Not to hide it, but to remind herself that no one would define her story but her. Then the city called. They wanted her to join the Police Accountability Board. At first, Maya hesitated. Sitting in meetings with the same officials who once ignored her cries for help? It felt like betrayal. But then she realized, change never comes from the outside screaming at the walls. It comes from the inside, knocking them down. She joined, and she shook things up. She questioned every budget, every policy, every use of force report. She demanded that officer complaints be made public. She insisted on mental health resources for officers dealing with trauma, because she was one of them. She pushed for real consequences for misconduct, not just quiet transfers and paid leave. And people started listening. The city began to shift, slowly, painfully. But Maya knew every revolution starts with a crack, and she had been the earthquake. But it came with a price. Her phone rang one night at 2 a.m. "You should have stayed in your place," the voice whispered. "We're watching you." Maya didn't sleep that night, or the next. She changed her locks, installed cameras, started carrying her weapon even at home. Every sound made her flinch. Every dark alley made her heart race. And through it all, she still stood tall in meetings, still showed up at rallies, still looked Stevens in the eye when she passed him during his court hearings. But it hurt. Oh, it hurt. She lost friends. People she used to laugh with in the break room now avoided her eyes. Some said she was making the department look bad. Others said she had betrayed the blue line. But Maya knew the truth. She never betrayed the badge. She protected what it should stand for. And still, the nightmares came. Sometimes she dreamt she was back in that store, Stevens pointing his gun at her again. Other nights, she was in the cell, and no one ever came. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, the weight of silence choking her. She tried therapy. It helped? Some. But the pain never left. She just learned how to carry it. Until one day, something changed. She walked into a middle school to give a talk about leadership and justice. She expected silence, polite claps. But when she walked in, the students stood and cheered. One girl, no older than 12, ran up to her and hugged her tight. "You're the reason I want to be brave," the girl whispered. Maya knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You already are." That moment stayed with her. It reminded her why she fought, not for the department, not even for herself, but for every person who had been silenced, ignored, erased, for every black woman in uniform who had to fight twice as hard for half the respect, for every child who thought they couldn't speak truth to power. But Maya needs you now. She's still fighting, still testifying, still demanding change in a system that resists every step forward. And the attacks haven't stopped. Just last week, someone slashed her tires outside a community event. The police called it random. She called it what it was, a warning. But she refuses to be silenced again. If you believe in what Maya is doing, press the like button. Let her know you see her. You support her. You believe her. Your support is more than just a number. It's a message that says we will not let injustice win, that her voice matters, that her pain will not go unseen, that her courage means something. So take a moment right now. Smash that like button if you believe the system needs change. Comment to send Maya your strength. And subscribe if you want to keep hearing the stories they tried to bury. Because Maya's fight isn't over. And with your support, she won't be fighting alone anymore. She didn't always follow the rules. That's what made Captain Maya Collins different. Long before the arrest, before the betrayal, before her name was dragged through the mud. She was already doing things people in power didn't like. They just couldn't prove it. At least, not yet. Maya had always known how to walk the line between the system and the truth. But sometimes, the truth required her to step outside that line. And when you're a black woman in a position of power, breaking rules, even for the right reasons, makes you dangerous. It started 2 years before the false arrest, when Maya uncovered a strange pattern buried deep in department case files, officers repeatedly using failure to comply as justification for force against unarmed black men. The numbers didn't make sense. So, late at night, alone in the records room, Maya began pulling files. Files she wasn't supposed to touch. Files she wasn't supposed to read. She copied names, dates, audio from body cams that had never been reviewed. She hid it all in a separate hard drive, one she kept stashed inside the lining of an old cereal box in her kitchen. Why? Because she knew. If anyone found out what she was doing, they'd bury her. But Maya wasn't afraid of being buried. She was afraid of being silent. That secret investigation led her to a case, a boy named Devin Moore, 17, who died in police custody. The official report said, medical emergency. But Maya dug deeper. Devin had no prior health conditions. The body cam footage from that night? Mysteriously corrupted. But there was one thing no one expected. Devin's little sister had been filming from a window. Maya tracked her down in a rundown apartment complex across town. The girl was scared, trembling. "They told me to delete it," she whispered. "Said I'd be arrested." Maya took her hand, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I'll protect you, no matter what." That night, the girl sent Maya the video. What it showed changed everything. The footage revealed 2 officers, one of whom was later promoted, pinning Devin to the ground, laughing as he begged for air. Maya knew what she had to do. She could have submitted it through the department's internal review process. But she didn't trust it, so she leaked it anonymously to a local journalist. Within days, protests broke out. Internal Affairs opened a new inquiry. The officers were placed on leave. But no one ever knew it was Maya who set it all in motion. It wasn't her first time. It wouldn't be her last. She became a ghost in her own department, always watching, always listening, always collecting truth and storing it where no one could touch it. Some nights she sat in her car for hours outside corrupt precincts, watching who went in, who came out. Other nights, she met confidential informants in laundromats and diners, swapping files under menus and sugar packets. At one point, she even posed as a disgruntled civilian to infiltrate an online police forum, uncovering racist messages and secret screenshots of officers bragging about bending rules. She screen-recorded everything. Her methods were bold, sometimes illegal, but always for justice. That's what made her a target. That's what made Stevens come after her. That's why she was framed. Not because she made a mistake, but because she got too close to the truth. They thought the arrest would break her. Instead, it exposed her. It turned a silent war into an open rebellion. And after she cleared her name, she went deeper. The public saw her as a victim who beat the odds. But the truth? Maya was working on something even bigger. A list. A carefully compiled collection of everything she had ever discovered. Names, cases, cover-ups, all organized in a digital vault protected by layers of encryption. She called it the Reckoning File. And she wasn't planning to keep it hidden much longer. But it wasn't just the files that made her dangerous. It was the things she dared to do. Like flying across the country under a fake name to meet a retired officer who'd fled the force after refusing to plant evidence. Like sneaking into a closed courtroom hearing just to record a corrupt DA laughing with a police union rep. Or the time she chased down a fleeing suspect herself, off-duty, unarmed, and in heels, because she believed he was being set up. Every step she took brought her closer to the truth, and deeper into danger. She was followed, threatened. At one point, someone even tried to hack her cloud storage. But Maya was ready. The moment the breach was detected, the files were auto-copied and shipped to 3 backup locations in 3 different states. She wasn't just collecting proof. She was preparing for war. The public still didn't know all of this. They only saw fragments. A news story here, a leaked memo there, a viral speech from Maya that racked up millions of views online. But what they didn't see was the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the destroyed relationships, the fact that she no longer visited her father's grave because she couldn't stand to show him a world still so broken, the fact that she sometimes stared at her gun longer than she should have, wondering how one person was supposed to carry so much weight alone. But then, a stranger would stop her on the street. A young girl would run up to hug her. A mother would whisper, "You gave me hope." Those moments, small but powerful, kept her going. Those comments, those likes, those shares, they were more than engagement metrics. They were lifelines. And right now, Maya needs you again, because she's about to release the reckoning file. All of it. Names, cases, cover-ups, truths that will shake the system to its core. And she knows they'll come for her harder than ever. They'll try to discredit her, silence her, ruin her life all over again. But she's not backing down. Not this time. So if you're reading this, comment below to support Maya. Tell her she's not alone. Tell her she's brave. Tell her to keep going. And if you believe in justice, smash the like button right now. Let's flood this post with the kind of encouragement they can't erase. Let's make noise louder than their silence. Because Maya's story isn't just her own, it's ours. And this fight? It's only beginning. She had never wanted to be a hero. Captain Maya Collins only wanted to serve, to protect, and to be respected for who she was, not feared for the color of her skin. But the world had never been that kind. The day she was framed for stealing a granola bar and a bottle of water wasn't the first time racism reached for her. It was just the first time it dragged her down in front of everyone. Her years of service meant nothing when Officer Rick Stevens looked at her. He didn't see a captain. He didn't see a leader. He saw a black woman he believed he could control. That's all it took for him to slap cold handcuffs on her wrists and parade her through her own precinct like a criminal. That humiliation, the silence from her fellow officers, the disbelief in their eyes, was a wound deeper than any physical pain she had ever known. But what no one knew, what no one could know, was what Maya had already endured before that day. Stevens hadn't targeted her randomly. He'd been watching her. He knew she was digging. Long before he tried to destroy her, Maya had been investigating the buried injustices hiding in plain sight. Cases that had quietly vanished, reports that were altered, complaints that mysteriously disappeared. She saw the patterns, the same names, the same neighborhoods, the same victims. Young black men accused of crimes with no evidence, body cams turned off, officers rewarded instead of punished. Maya had collected it all, file by file, report by report, building a quiet storm of truth that could tear the whole department open. And Stevens? He was at the center of it. That's why he framed her. He knew she was close. So when Maya was arrested, she didn't just lose her freedom. She lost the protection of silence. She became a target. The department hesitated to clear her name. Internal affairs stalled. Her apartment was vandalized. Her family received threats. Her inbox overflowed with messages telling her to quit, to back off, to stay in her place. But Maya had never belonged to anyone's place but her own. And if they thought humiliation would break her, they didn't know who they were dealing with. She fought harder. Even with the public turning on her, even when she had to watch her own mugshot on TV. Even when she had to walk into courtrooms knowing that half the people believed she was guilty. She endured it, not just for herself, but for every black officer who had been silenced, and every innocent person still waiting for someone to speak up. But the turning point came when she risked everything. Late one night, with her badge still suspended and her name still under fire, Maya and her loyal partner Deshawn broke into Stephen's home. They weren't criminals. They were desperate truth-seekers, backed into a corner by a man who had the system on his side. Inside that house, buried in a drawer behind a locked cabinet, they found the unedited footage from the convenience store. The one that showed the truth. Maya picking up the snack, paying for it, nodding respectfully to the clerk, and leaving. No theft, no crime, just a woman living her life, brought to her knees by hate. But before they could leave, Stevens came home. The next minutes were a blur of shouts, gunfire, and fear. Maya and Deshawn ran through backyards and alleyways, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. They didn't sleep that night. They hid in Maya's aunt's old cabin, barricaded the door, and uploaded the footage to the cloud. As the sirens drew closer, as Stevens tried to force his way in with vengeance burning in his eyes, Maya stood her ground. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She raised her voice. "You will not bury me. You will not rewrite this." And finally, the world listened. When the footage went public, the lies unraveled. Stevens was suspended. Investigations opened. Officers who had once doubted her now stood in uncomfortable silence. But even after the truth came out, Maya didn't feel whole, because the truth didn't erase what she had been forced to survive. It didn't erase the fear, the sleepless nights, the betrayal. It didn't bring back her peace or restore the dignity stripped from her in front of the people she once called family. But it gave her something else. A platform. A reason. She went public with her story. She told people everything, from the first moment Stevens disrespected her authority in the precinct to the moment she stood face to face with him in that cabin, heart pounding, life on the line. She described the terror of being dragged through a system built to protect men like him. And she described the strength it took to not just survive, but to fight back. The community rallied. Mothers cried. Young girls saw themselves in Maya and stood taller. Protesters chanted her name. Civil rights leaders shared her story. What was once shame became a symbol of resistance. Maya Collins had become more than a captain. She had become a spark. She returned to the force, but not to stay quiet. She pushed for policy reforms. She exposed deeper networks of corruption. She filed for the opening of all internal complaint records. And behind the scenes, she worked on something even bigger, the Reckoning File, a complete archive of every buried truth she had ever uncovered. She vowed to release it soon, and with it, demand the system finally answer for what it had done, not just to her, but to so many others. And now, Maya needs us, because this fight isn't just hers. It belongs to every person who's been mistreated because of their race. Every innocent life taken too soon. Every voice silenced by power. Every truth buried to protect a lie. If you believe Maya deserves justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who's ever suffered under the weight of discrimination, press the like button right now. Drop a comment below to encourage her. Let her know you see her, believe her, and stand with her. Because what Maya went through wasn't just painful, it was powerful, and the world needs to hear every word. Maya Collins never planned to live a double life. But some truths are too dangerous to fight from the inside. After her public arrest and eventual vindication, most people thought her story had reached its end. They saw the viral video. They saw the corrupt officer get suspended. They saw her name cleared. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was what came next. The secret investigations The encrypted flash drives, the late-night meetings in abandoned lots. Maya didn't go back to being just a captain. She became something else entirely. A shadow with a badge. A whisper in the walls of a broken system. And the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it got. It started with whispers, officers resigning without explanation, internal memos disappearing from official records, people warning her to stop asking questions. But Maya couldn't let go. She had seen too much, survived too much. And when she stumbled across a sealed file labeled only Echo Code 17, she knew she was about to enter a place most cops were too afraid to even talk about. The file wasn't digital. It was printed, stored in a dusty filing cabinet in a restricted office that had supposedly been shut down years ago. The details were vague, but one phrase stuck out. Patterned misconduct, linked to recruitment division, protected by high-ranking officials. Recruitment? Maya had never thought to look there, but the more she followed the leads, the more sinister it became. Rookie officers with violent records being placed in vulnerable communities, complaint reports deleted, mental health evaluations forged, all pointing to a network of power-shielding corrupt cops before they even hit the streets. It was a pipeline, and Maya was going to blow it wide open. To do it, she had to disappear. Not literally, but enough to where she could move without drawing attention. She stopped wearing her uniform, changed her routine, bought an old flip phone, untraceable, and used burner laptops for all her research. She even went off-grid for a full week, traveling to a rural precinct 3 towns over under a fake name just to retrieve a file from a former whistleblower who had gone into hiding. The man was paranoid, living in a shack with no Wi-Fi, windows boarded up. But when he slid the folder across the table, his eyes shaking, he whispered, "If they find out I gave this to you, I'm dead." Maya opened the folder and felt her stomach drop. Dozens of photos, training reports, psychological evaluations. One name popped up again and again. Officer Rick Stevens. He wasn't just part of the system. He was a product of it. Groomed, planted, protected. That's when Maya knew the rabbit hole was deeper than anyone could imagine. She took the files back to the city under a blanket of darkness, her headlights off for half the drive. She didn't trust the police. She didn't trust the mayor's office. She didn't even trust internal affairs anymore. There was only one person she still believed in, Deshawn, her old partner. Together, they created a hidden server to store the information. Layered encryption. Dead man switches. If anything happened to Maya, the files would auto-send to every major news outlet in the country. But the pressure was getting to her. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in weeks. Her phone buzzed constantly with veiled threats. At one point, her apartment was broken into, her drawers overturned, but nothing taken. It wasn't a robbery. It was a warning. And still she kept going. She met with victims' families, traveled across state lines to gather testimony from former cadets who had been pushed out of the academy for speaking up. At one point, she disguised herself as a civilian to sit in on a closed disciplinary hearing, illegally, just to record a captain admitting under his breath that covering it up was easier than explaining it. Maya got it all on tape. But with every piece of truth she uncovered, the danger grew. One night, as she left a diner after a secret meeting with a retired officer, her car wouldn't start. She popped the hood and saw the wires had been cut. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew someone had followed her. She knew she was being hunted. She left the car behind and vanished into the night, disappearing into back streets she knew better than anyone. That night, she didn't go home. She didn't sleep. She crouched in an alley with her hand on her gun, watching the city breathe without her. That's when she made her decision. She couldn't just expose the system. She had to break it. Maya began building a team, quietly. People like her, officers who had been pushed out, lawyers who had seen too many wrongful convictions, journalists who had been threatened into silence. Together, they called themselves Echo Black, a name born from the file that started it all. Their mission? To expose every hidden injustice and build a coalition so loud, so undeniable, that even the system couldn't ignore it. They leaked audio recordings, posted redacted documents, released side-by-side comparisons of body cam footage and altered reports. They used encrypted forums and code phrases, moving like ghosts through the department. And when people asked who was behind it all, no one suspected Maya Collins. Not yet, but now the truth is coming. Maya is preparing to reveal everything. The reckoning file, the echo code, 17 documents, the cover-ups, the deaths, the lies. Every painful secret the department buried under layers of silence and denial. And she knows, once it goes public, she may never wear the badge again. She may never walk the streets freely, but she's willing to pay that price. Because she's seen what silence costs. She's lived through what injustice feels like. And she's not afraid anymore. If Maya's courage has moved you, comment below. Let her know she's not alone. Tell her she's doing the right thing. And if you believe in justice, in truth, in standing up even when it hurts, press the like button right now. Support Maya's fight. Because this isn't just a story, it's a revolution. And you're part of it now. She had survived the arrest. She had cleared her name. She had even stood before crowds and told her story with fire in her voice and pain in her chest. But nothing could prepare Captain Maya Collins for the loneliness that came after the fight. People applauded when she spoke. They posted her quotes online. They called her a symbol of strength. But when the crowds dispersed and the cameras turned off, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the cracks in her ceiling, wondering if justice had really been served. Or if she was just another black woman the system tried to break and failed to silence. Her name was cleared, yes. But her soul? It was still carrying wounds no one could see, and not all of them had been inflicted by her enemies. Because the hardest part of her journey wasn't the arrest. It wasn't being framed. It wasn't even staring down the barrel of Stephen's gun in that dark cabin. The hardest part was realizing that some of the people she had loved and trusted, officers she had bled beside, cried beside, never truly saw her. Not as equal, not as sister, not as worthy of belief. The pain hit in small moments, like when she returned to the precinct and one of her old partners avoided eye contact, or when she walked into a briefing room and the chatter stopped, or when her mentor, once a father figure, told her quietly, "I wish you had handled it differently." Handled what differently? Surviving? Telling the truth? The betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was in the silence. Sometimes it was in the absence of support when she needed it most. And still, she pressed on. She kept going to work, kept showing up at hearings, kept meeting with families who had lost their sons and daughters to unjust stops and brutal force. She knew their pain because she had tasted it. Even if she didn't die, something inside her did. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the reflection of someone the world had tried to erase. And that's why she couldn't stop. Even when her chest ached from exhaustion. Even when her voice cracked from repeating her truth over and over again. She began keeping a journal, not for the public, not for the courts, but for herself. A place where she could admit how much it hurt. A place where she could write down the names of the people who abandoned her when she needed them most. And the names of those who stood by her side. Few, but fierce. Every page was filled with emotional scars, memories of quiet agony, being fingerprinted by an officer who once called her his hero, watching her mother cry after seeing Maya's mugshot on the evening news, waking up in the middle of the night because she thought she heard someone breaking into her home, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. But there were other things in that journal, too, things she didn't speak of out loud, like the guilt of surviving when so many others hadn't, the guilt of having a platform when others had been buried in silence, the guilt of sometimes wishing she could just forget. Because the weight of being a symbol, a voice, a fighter, it was heavier than anyone knew. And then came the nightmares, the cabin, the flashing lights. The moment she thought it was all over, she'd wake up gasping, sweat dripping down her neck, the sound of Stephen's voice echoing in her ears. "You're done." She wasn't done. But God, she was tired. One night, Maya sat on the floor with her journal open and a bottle of water shaking in her hand. She stared at a photo, her first day as captain. She looked so proud, so full of fire. But that woman felt so far away now. She wondered if she'd ever get back to her, or if the scars would always be louder than the strength. And yet, there was still something in her, a flicker, a flame that refused to die, a whisper that said, "You didn't come this far to only come this far." So Maya wiped her tears, stood up, and picked up her phone. She posted something that night, not polished, not political, not rehearsed, just raw. "I'm not okay, not every day. I'm tired of fighting, tired of smiling when I'm breaking inside. But I still believe the truth matters, and I still believe we deserve better. So if you're hurting, if you've been silenced, this fight is for you too. We're not done, and I still need you. All of you." The comments flooded in. "You saved me." "I believe in you." "Thank you for being real." "Keep going. We've got your back." And for the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel alone. Because this was never just about her. It was about every voice silenced, every injustice buried, every dream that almost died under the weight of a broken badge. Maya wasn't perfect. She was human, but she was also unbreakable. And as long as she had breath, she would keep fighting. For truth, for justice, for every soul who needed to believe that surviving wasn't the end of the story. If you believe Maya's journey matters, press the like button right now. Leave a comment to let her know you're standing with her. Because the battle isn't over, but neither is her strength. She had worn the badge with pride once. Captain Maya Collins believed in justice, truly believed it could be fair, that it could serve everyone, that her presence as a high-ranking black woman in the force could shift something. But belief didn't protect her the day she was thrown in handcuffs. It didn't save her from the humiliation of being walked through her own precinct like a thief. It didn't stop the smirks from officers who once called her sister, and it certainly didn't shield her from the lies Officer Rick Stevens spun so easily, so convincingly. It nearly destroyed her. But what the world didn't see, what they couldn't see, was that Maya had already lived through worse. Her fight didn't begin in that convenience store. It began long before, in rooms where her voice was dismissed, in meetings where she was outnumbered, in a system that smiled in her face, but tightened its grip behind her back. Before the false accusation, Maya had uncovered a trail of internal reports involving racial misconduct, quiet complaints buried under paperwork, suppressed by signatures and red stamps. She was close to the truth, closer than anyone knew. Stevens was just the blade the system used to cut her down before she could expose it all. And when it happened, When she was dragged into that holding cell and accused of stealing something so small it barely made sense, she realized what it really was. A message. A warning. But they underestimated her. The world watched her fall, but they didn't see what she did next. They didn't see her tracking down a terrified store clerk and getting his confession on tape. They didn't see her driving through the night to retrieve a hidden flash drive with the unedited footage. They didn't see her dodge bullets, literally, as she escaped a gun-wielding Stevens, her heart pounding in the dark. They didn't see her staring down her own fear, knees buckling, hands trembling, but refusing to back down. And when the truth finally came out, when the world saw the unedited footage, when Stevens was suspended, when the charges vanished as quickly as they appeared, it should have been over. But it wasn't, because clearing your name doesn't clear your pain. Maya returned to a department that still whispered behind her back. Her office felt colder. The chair creaked differently. The hallway eyes followed her, not with respect, but with suspicion. And yet she stood tall. Not because she didn't feel the weight of it all, but because she knew someone had to carry it. The truth is, she almost quit. One night, alone in her apartment, she stared at her badge on the kitchen table, tears streaming silently down her face. She had risked everything. She had nearly died to prove her innocence. And for what? A few headlines? A quiet apology? A department that refused to say her name with pride? But just as she reached to close the box on her badge for good, her phone buzzed. It was a video message from a 13-year-old girl in Detroit. "Hi, Captain Collins. I saw what happened to you. My brother went through the same thing, but no one believed him. When I saw you stand up, it made me believe I could do something too. I just wanted to say, thank you." Maya broke down. Not because she was weak, but because finally, something reached the part of her that was still clinging to hope. She replayed that message over and over. That night, she didn't put the badge in the box. She put it back on her heart. And that was when the unbelievable part of her story began. Maya didn't just return to duty. She started a movement. Quiet at first, but growing every day. She began visiting precincts across the state, speaking directly to officers, challenging their assumptions. She spoke to civilians at town halls, in schools, in churches. Her name became more than a headline. It became a warning to those who abused power, and a beacon for those who still believed in something better. She built a task force, independent, multiracial, community-powered. They called it the Guardian Circuit. Its mission? To uncover, document, and expose internal cover-ups in police departments nationwide. Maya didn't wait for change. She became it. And the cases they found? Unreal. Officers erasing body cam footage, internal memos coaching new recruits on how to control community complaints, evidence lockers tampered with to protect insiders. The deeper they dug, the more horrifying it became. And through it all, Maya kept moving, kept risking, kept pushing. Until one night, she received a call from a young officer in another city. He was trembling. "They're planning to make you disappear," he said. "You're not safe." She didn't panic. She prepared. She made sure every file was copied to secure clouds, every confession time-stamped, every piece of evidence connected to automatic releases. If they touched her, the entire network would go public. And even with that threat looming over her, Maya still went live. In a national broadcast streamed across thousands of devices, she looked straight into the camera and said, "I was framed, I was hunted, I was humiliated, but I am still here. And now I'm fighting for every name that was erased, for every voice that was silenced, for every life stolen without justice. I don't need your permission to speak the truth. I only need you to listen." The internet exploded. Tears, applause, rage, hope. The truth was out, and in that moment, Maya wasn't just a survivor. She was a storm. If you followed her journey, if her story moved you, press the like button right now. Drop a comment. Let Maya know she's not fighting alone. Because the pain she endured, the risks she took, the truth she unearthed, it's for all of us. This isn't just a story. It's a revolution. And Maya Collins lit the first match. In the end, Captain Maya Collins didn't just survive. She transformed. From the moment she was wrongfully arrested and paraded through her own precinct in handcuffs, to the day the truth shattered the lies that were meant to destroy her, Maya's journey was more than a battle for justice. It was a mirror held up to the system, and a torch passed to every person who ever doubted their voice could make a difference. The scars didn't disappear, but they hardened into strength. The shame they tried to brand her with became the very thing she used to empower others. And the woman who once wept alone in silence? She now stood before crowds, her voice unwavering, her message clear. You can break the system without letting it break you. Her movement, the Guardian Circuit, is now a national network of officers, activists, lawyers, and civilians working together to hold law enforcement accountable, to protect communities, and to amplify voices too often ignored. And at its center stands Maya. Not as a victim, not even as a captain, but as a leader who turned pain into purpose. But what made Maya's story truly powerful wasn't just the downfall of the corrupt Officer Stevens or the exposure of a system designed to protect its worst. It was the moment after, when the world looked at her not with pity, but with respect. When she smiled, finally free. When her mother hugged her and said, "You didn't just save yourself, you saved all of us." That's the ending Maya never thought she'd live to see. Peace. The kind of peace that comes not from silence, but from justice. She now mentors young Black officers, teaches accountability workshops, and meets with lawmakers to shape new policy. Her life, once nearly shattered by racism and corruption, has become a blueprint for how to rebuild something better. Not just for herself, but for everyone. And if Maya could offer one piece of advice to anyone listening, it would be this. Don't wait for someone to give you permission to do what's right. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one no one wants to hear, but that's the one that must be spoken. Sometimes you'll be called too loud, too bold, too angry. Speak anyway. And if the system tries to bury you, remember this. You are not a seed. You are a fire. Let them feel your heat. Real life doesn't always come with neat endings. It comes with struggle, pain, and uncertainty. But it also comes with choices. Maya chose to fight back. She chose to risk everything for the truth. And because she did, she didn't just change her story. She changed the lives of countless others. So, if you've followed Maya's journey from the beginning, if you've felt the weight of her pain, if you've stood in awe of her courage, if you've cried when she was silenced and cheered when she roared, then do this one thing. Press the like button right now to show Maya she's not standing alone. Drop a comment below. Let her know what part of her journey spoke to you. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, where real stories meet real change, because the next Maya could be someone you know, or someone you love, or maybe someone like you. And when that moment comes, you'll remember her story, and you'll remember what to do. You'll stand, You'll speak, you'll fight. Just like she did.